What's going on, guys? Welcome to this week's episode of Merricks Garage. The build is starting to come to a wrap. I've been pushing hard. I've got a ton of stuff done. I got a long video. So let's get straight to it. Merricks Garage.
I gotta recenter the axle. What is starting to happen is everything is starting to come home to roost, meaning all of the measurements, all of the angles, all of the geometry that I have done is starting to be put to the test. Meaning that I put the frame in, it's straight, I got the links in, they're good, but now I need to articulate, I need to make sure that limit straps, bump stops, shock mounts, hoop mounts, frame tie-ins, sway bar, all of those fit and play nicely together. That was a huge challenge up front when I did the front link conversion, just because of steering and panhard bar and exhaust and drive shafts and all that stuff. This is being a lot simpler. But today I'm going to try and shift the axle to the driver's side. Now I'll show you what I'm talking about and explain how I'm going to do that, because it is pretty cool. It's one of the things that a four-link axle, four-link suspension setup is going to give you. With these links, I have multiple ways to adjust many things. I can adjust the wheelbase by lengthening both of the outside lowers. I can adjust my pinion angle by adjusting both of the uppers. But to adjust it side to side, what I need to do is shorten, lengthen, shorten, lengthen. Basically, think of it like lacing up a pair of shoes. I'm tightening it up and pushing it that way at the same time. So today, I have to get the axle up in the air, get the load off it, and move some of these joints around. So I think what I'm going to do is maybe put all the joints back together and start filling them up with lubricant and grease, because that's on my list also. Okay, so here is how I am getting my measurement. As close as I can get to that. You can see that's coming in at 12 inches. Whereas over here on my passenger side, I don't know if you guys can see that, I'm coming in at 13.5. So I need to move the axle 3/4 of an inch that way. This is probably going to take trial and error. We're going to have to see what happens. But this is one of the last times I'm going to be pulling these things apart, I think. Hopefully. Whew. Tie downs and ratchets are a tool that should be in everyone's toolbox. I have to get the load off of the link so I can pull them out, and the best way I found to do that is with a ratchet strap around the axle to kind of pull it back and forth. That allows me to be able to get in here and pull this guy out. See, easy. Now I just need to adjust this guy down and move on to the next one. There's Zerk fittings on all of these joints, but the problem is the traditional straight, which are going to be the strongest, aren't going to give you access when they're up in place. So I swapped them out to something that is going to give me more access. So there are definitely some drawbacks to working by yourself. Part of the issue is everything just moves so slowly. First of all, you can't assign basic tasks to somebody else. You got to do all the little stuff. If that's just like replacing Zerk fittings or servicing a Johnny joint, I got to do all of it. But the bigger issue is when I've got to do the big, gnarly, heavy stuff like this. I've got to use ratchet straps and jack stands and brute force, and I just get really frustrated, burned out. It's super gnarly. This is probably the worst part of it, next to all the deconstruction and decontamination, all the cleaning of the stuff that I pull off before I rebuild. So I'm pretty fried. I've been kind of avoiding this day. I knew it was coming. I knew I had to deal with it. It just works me. So let me show you where we got. I got the axle centered. My wheelbase is good. It's within like less than half an inch. Side to side is now perfect. I'm going to set my bump stops. I'm going to set my limit straps. Yeah, and move on from there. But let me show you. Here's one of the ratchet straps that I was using. Oh man, I can film one-handed while I work. I've become a master of solitude. Okay, so hook that. We're coming in right at 25 inches. And the other side, should be coming in at exactly the same also. 25 inches. If my pinion is right, I'm gonna be a happy camper. But I'll be kind of surprised if it is. It was at 20 degrees before, which is way too steep. But I can leave that till later to adjust. That is the 2 top links that I need to change. But I'm fried on this. Let's bolt it back together. Okay, you're looking at it. Limit straps in, bump straps in, frame tied. Oh, what else? I adjusted all the links today, so the axle is now centered. I changed ride height slightly. We're gonna measure wheelbase here in a second. But I wanna see how it does. That's awesome. Let's do that one more time. Oh, this is gonna be good. Okay, it's been a pretty gnarly day today. Like I said earlier, I knew this was gonna be a lot of headache. Just getting this axle moved around, getting everything centered. I don't know if I have it perfect yet. My wheelbase seems to be off by about 3/4 of an inch. So, I think I got a way to deal with that. But the axle is centered underneath now. Ride height is good, as you can see. I've raised it a little bit. I've also put on the other bump stop and put on the limit straps. Yeah, here, let me show you. Okay, so this isn't ideal. I mean, in a perfect world, it would be directly above. But the issue I have, there's just a lot of stuff going on right here, and there's not a whole lot of real estate left. So this actually works pretty well. I like the way they kick out like that. Yeah, and then you can't tell really, but there's quite a bit more space now. It's definitely a lot closer to equal, and I measured it and we're sitting good. So next up is building a strike pad for the bump stop. I need to build something that moves laterally too, as under articulation, that's when I'm gonna need it. And I may be redoing my brake lines. I spent hours doing them and I'm just not that happy with it. Whatever. One of the things I get all the time from people is, how did you know how to do that? Or I can't believe you're doing this. Or where did you learn? I didn't. I have no training, like I've mentioned. This is all a first for me. Now, I have mechanical aptitude and I have a great degree of English stubbornness. But ultimately, I start at the end. I start with what I want to have, and then I figure out a way to make that happen. So I have an idea in my mind of where I want to be, And each step forward is a progression in the build, but obviously progression in getting closer to my goal. So I don't set out going, I want a badass truck, I'm gonna put big tires on it. I start thinking, like, what do I want the truck to do? What ultimately am I looking for? And then I work backwards. And the same thing with this frame build. Like, I just decided, like, what do I want, and what's the worst that could happen? Like, ultimately, if I get in there and this thing doesn't work, I mean, no one died, no one got hurt. It's just life experience. And I think sometimes people need a bigger dose of life experience. I'd rather fail, but have tried, than this is sounding like Tony Robbins, and I'm not intending it to. Just start. Just get after it. Don't let people tell you you can't do that. I built this thing. I did the 1-ton conversion and the full interior on the side of a road. I cleaned up my tools and locked them away every night. It took me 6 months of working in the dirt. And now, I mean, this sucks right here. I mean, I'm stoked to be at home, but man, is it gnarly without a lift, without extra people, having to make this safe and easy for my kids to walk through every day. If I had a shop, this would be a lot easier, but I don't. And so I gotta do it this way. The obstacle is the way.
I'm hoping this is going to be one of the last times I have to do full articulation, but I kind of doubt it. This is full droop. So the shocks are nice and loose, not carrying the load. It's all being carried on these guys. On another note, these jack stands are amazing. I don't normally get excited about jack stands, but the adjustability, the height, the strength, the wide base, and the price of these is a no-brainer. They're originally intended for plumbing, but they work fantastic for this. And being able to adjust, it's huge. Huge! Anyway, full droop. I pulled a spring. Let's run some articulation tests. Okay, so this is probably pretty close to where bump's gonna be, because I'm gonna be building up this bump stop platform. It's not gonna be hitting on the tube. I just wanted to see if I'm still in line. Yeah. And then the other thing is to look for impingement up here. No, looking good. Both sides of the axle aren't touching the frame. Okay, I like that. As you can see, probably gonna trim around here. Same on the other side. That's because I pushed the axle back. Full bump looks decent though. Okay, this does a very good job right now of illustrating the swing that the axle sees during articulation. So if you watch the axle, it's going to start moving passenger side. It's really noticeable on the way down. That's why I'm bringing it back up to show you guys that. Okay, now this is where I was concerned, but I got a lot of room. Okay, but watch this swing. That's dope. And it's gonna self-clearance on that. I don't know if there's much I can do about that, because this is pretty good articulation. But my bump stops would have started aggressively limiting travel on this right now. So let's check the other side. But the spring does fit all the way up. It's probably going to end up self-clearancing on the frame if I'm not careful. So I think I'm going to flap disc that down quite a bit. Ow, I have been chasing down a bunch of gremlins today using my power supply. I got the wiring completed, but the lights aren't working. And what should have been a 30-minute job has turned into a much longer job. I believe I've traced it down to, I've reversed the black and the blue on this connector. This has taken about 3 hours of troubleshooting to come up with. I'm thinking that's the problem. I'm gonna cut this connector off, put a new one on, and see if that fixes it. It's always something. Okay, may look like a big mess, and it mostly is, but I pigtailed this, so I'm gonna have less of this nastiness, which really was bad in itself. So yeah, that's what we're working with now. Gotta solder all the rest on though now. The wiring is in and laying pretty neatly. I picked up these cool little tabs from Rough Stuff. I love them. You can use them all over the place. Here they're holding the brake lines on. They're just little weld-on tabs that give you a place to put a zip tie on. Yep, so brake lines are in, electrical's in. I've got to terminate it down at the front of the truck. But I ran the other line today for the rear brakes. This is the one that's going to run all the way along this upper link arm here. And like I showed you guys, I've changed this up like 10 times, but I think I'm pretty happy with where I've landed. I got all the shocks burned in, the mounts today. It's time to start blasting this thing. Get it all sanded down. Start it up there, you can see. And then I can start spraying it with some of this awesome Steel-It.
When I did the brakes up front, I ran braided line pretty much exclusively. I did ran hard line from my master cylinder down to the proportioning valve, and I left the stock line for the back, so that was still hard line. But I put braided up front, just for speed and ease, and it's worked just fine. I know there's a big debate over whether braided line is too soft or if you'll feel it in the brake pads. No, I never did. But I have done hard line on the back, and it's been fun. It's not that hard to do. You just gotta take your time, make clean cuts, deburr, sand things down, and use a good flaring tool, or use a flaring tool properly. I'll show you my formula pretty quickly. There's a couple tips and tricks I've got for it, but I'll do a more detailed in-length video on this later if you guys want. But it's worked for me. Gave me arthritis in my hands, but it looks good. So the flatter cut that you have, I'm not sure if this is going to come into focus here, but the flatter cut you have, the better. If you don't have a flat cut, when you press the die in to make the first flare, it's going to go off angle and then everything will be all cocked up. But if it gets a little bit off, don't sweat it. Some of mine have come off now. I don't know if they're leaking yet, but I'd highly doubt it. So I'm going to double flare this one. I'll show you guys really quickly, and then we'll put it back in the truck. When you flare something, you're going to want to make sure that you have everything on there that you need before you add the flare in, because obviously once the flare is in, nothing else is going in. So I've got to put the this wire protector, and then I put my nut on there. A good rule of thumb I use is when you are flaring it, you want to make sure that the die that you use, you have that much tubing exposed so that the die can flatten it out and then seat properly. So I'm using 3/16 line, 3/16 die. This goes in here, and then I put this guy on. Okay, now I've got the die in. Just gonna slowly work my way down, and while I'm doing this, I like to watch and make sure that the die goes down nice and flat. And if it doesn't, you can just back off and it will start moving around on you a little bit. Bring it all the way down in. And that right there is your first flare. And you'll see it's just a little bubble. What's going to happen now is I'm going to flare this inwards, creating a double flare. So I remove this guy, the initial die comes out, put the same die back, or the tool back in. Okay, back it off. And there's our double flare. I must have rerouted my cables, brake lines here several times. I'm just trying to get a good spot where they're going to be out of the way, no significant bends, and protected. So this is where I've landed. I think this is going to work. I got these two big loops here. These are just service loops. Should it snag, it's got a place to at least give a little bit. Not that I expected to snag. Also, if I decide to move the line somewhere else, I do have a couple, probably 3 or 4 inches on each side that can give me some extra. Yeah, and as you can see, here's the bump stops all lined up on both sides. And got my limit straps right here. It's coming together. I'm gonna see you guys at Hammers for sure. Knock on wood. Yeah, so it's not pretty, but you get the idea of what I'm trying to do here. This is the first run that basically ties the two pieces together. This got plug welded. This extends all the way back. Plug weld, plug weld, plug weld. Now I'm gonna put another piece of plate over the top of this one to do a full run. Top of this one all the way across, kind of sandwiching the frame in between. And
And then TBD. I'm not sure what my next step is yet. Maybe I'll table it for a little bit and see what I can come up with. Okay, listen up, jerkies. No judging me on my massive fill. But so, it may look like a mess, but there is several plates in here. There's 2 of those plates that are 7 gauge. And then I've also got this guy tying it in. And I'm probably going to do something on the other side too. But for now, I'm pretty happy with how this has come out. It's time to blast it with some steel it. So I've hit it with the grit. It's down. I just hit the brake parts on it. But yeah, whew, that was ugly work. With the big push of the last few weekends, I have made a ton of progress on the truck, and I'm happy to say I think King of the Hammers is highly likely at this point. It should be roadworthy and ready to go by then. And it can't come soon enough. I'll be honest, this is breaking me down. It's just such gnarly work. Anyone who's ever built a truck knows what goes into it, but until you do it, you just can't really quantify just the sheer amount of work you gotta do. I know, shocking, right? Building a truck takes work, but it's beat me up. I mean, crawling under the body every time to check the suspension or cycle the suspension, taking tires that weigh 100 pounds plus each, on and off, on and off, on and off, moving an axle, and doing it all while squatting or crawling or laying on your back. Oh, dude, I'm feeling my age. But that's all good. I'll have a sweet truck to show for it, and I'll rest when it's finished.